Welcome to Faith Speaks and Around Town. I'm your host, Dick Patton, and it's a pleasure to welcome you here on these shows. And with me on Faith Speaks, of course, is my very good friend and pastor, Jonathan Hopkins from Concordia Lutheran Church here in Concord. And I always call him Father. I can't help it because he just, with that call, he makes me think of a priest. And I know he's very close to it, but you know, he has done a lot of good things here in Concord, and he just got back from El Paso, Texas, and that was on a mission. And what did you do down there?
Well, I went to this thing called a border immersion program. It's run by Iglesia Luterana Cristo Rey. Cristo Rey means Christ King. And they run these border immersion programs for people like myself and others. I went with other Lutherans from around New England, and it's so that you can learn about things that are happening at the border in El Paso. So we went out, and most days what we did is we went around and we talked to different people. We talked to people who were undocumented. We talked about people who were refugees who just came here. We talked to Border Patrol, judges. We talked to a judge. Talked to nonprofit people who were helping people who were refugees coming to the United States, just to learn about all the things that were happening kind of firsthand at the actual border.
So it is a major problem down there.
We are facing a crisis that is for sure. People are fleeing from El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, which have unstable governments, and are fleeing into, coming to the United States because they're fearful of their life. Gangs have kind of taken over in those two countries. It's a problem that has been the result of, my opinion, has been the result of really bad U.S. foreign policy, bad domestic policy for the last 50, 60 years. And so it's not a new problem, it's just now it's a real crisis. And our border is kind of overwhelmed. The people that work at the border are overwhelmed. There's so many people coming. The day that we got to El Paso, which was a Saturday, that very day. So the way it works is if you're seeking asylum, once you cross over into the United States, you put up your hands and you say, I'm seeking asylum. And then you are taken by the Border Patrol to a processing center. And at the processing center, you're there for about 72 hours. And in that time, they do some little research and they find out, one, do you have a sponsor in the United States, someone who's going to keep care of you while you are here, and two, do you have a credible threat of why you left your home country? Once those two things are ascertained, then you are released. And so the day that we were there, 696 people were released from the processing center, from Border Control. And in El Paso, nonprofits are set up shelters to help those people. So they go from the processing center into one of these shelters, and they stay there until the person who is their sponsor gets them a ticket so that they can go wherever that is in the country, wherever their sponsor is. So that takes time. So there were 696 people released into the shelters, and thank God for the nonprofits, because if it wasn't for them, then people would just be on the street and they wouldn't have anything. So thank God that those people are doing that work, very important work. So the night we were there, we went to a hotel that was being rented out by a nonprofit called Annunciation House, and they were housing refugees in this hotel. And we went there we made them dinner and brought dinner to them. And then another night we went to another shelter in a different part of El Paso and served dinner for the refugees. It was probably about 300 or so refugees in that particular shelter that night, and we brought dinner, we made dinner and brought it to them there. So when I was in El Paso, one of my takeaways is that we are, when we talk about this issue, we are confusing it, because we're really rolling it all into one big issue called immigration. And really, there are different aspects of that. So one issue is people who have come to this country. Everybody comes to this country initially comes legally for the most part. That have come, they had a visa, they had a work visa, or they had a student visa, or there's also something that you can get called a 78-hour visa, which allows people who are in Mexico to come to the United States to visit family during for about 78 hours. You can't work during that time, but you can come and visit. So some people overstayed those visas. So, and then for whatever reason have become undocumented. So that's one issue, undocumented. The second issue is people who are fleeing from war or violence and fleeing out of their country and coming to the United States. That's an asylum issue. Those two things are not necessarily the same thing. They don't have the same answers to them.
See, I'm a little surprised when you mentioned Guatemala and Honduras. I thought those two countries were okay. El Salvador has been kind of a if and on country along with Nicaragua, but I thought Guatemala and Costa Rica and Honduras were all safe countries.
I have to just plead that I am less I am more knowledgeable about El Salvador because I was there in 1999, so I know more of that history and more of the reasons for those things. I know less about Honduras and Guatemala. I do know that when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State and Obama was president, that we allowed a dictator basically to overtake that country, and since then it has descended into some deep chaos. One of my pastoral colleagues who was with me has been to Honduras many times, and he spoke to me, and he talked about how dire the situation is in Honduras as well. So, but again, just to be fair, we have been messing around in those countries, United States, for many, many years and have created a mess.
Yep.
And they are supply and demand capitalism. They are providing what people in the United States want, which is drugs. So if we stop doing drugs, they would stop producing drugs, right? If we stop doing them, they would stop producing them, trying to get them into the country. Most of those drugs come in through the port of entry. They come in trucks. They'll have like 3 trucks with the drugs, and they'll know that one of those trucks is going to get caught, but the other 2 can kind of sail through while the other 2 are busy. So there's that piece to it, certainly, but and it's big business for people. It's major business. So one person in El Salvador said, "Hey, if people in the United States stopped doing drugs, they would stop making drugs to bring here." But that's what we want. So and the opioid epidemic is proof of that here in the United States and that kind of thing. So we are creating these conditions that are making it possible for people to do all this stuff in our country. And we don't have we're making it worse by the noise that's created by people screaming and shouting, and by creating fear, at the border. Most of the people that are coming across the border are not criminals. They're not coming they're coming because they're fleeing their country. So 92% of the people coming across the border are not coming because they're trying to do harm. Now, do we have to protect against we don't want that 8% to come in, sure, but when people talk about this issue, it's all these criminals are coming, and that doesn't help make good sound policy or help us to think about this together in a rational way. So we're just screaming at each other, and it's not helping the situation. And the Border Patrol person who we talked to, he said that thing. He said that to us, that because we're not talking to each other, because the politicians and whatever are not talking to each other, that we're making it worse. Instead of giving them the what they need to do their job, and they're overwhelmed. when we were in El Salvador, we heard from quite a few refugees that they talked about the processing center as being a freezer because it was so cold. Well, the reason for that is because when you go to the processing center, they take everything except for what you're wearing. So that if you have a coat, they take your coat, blanket, take your blanket, they take your shoelaces. And the reason for that is because if someone were to do something with those, hang themselves or hurt somebody else, then they would be responsible. So that's why they take it. And they give them basically this tinfoil blanket that probably doesn't do much. And they put them in a cell. And those cells were not set up to take care of families. They were set up to take care of single men. And it's cold because if you see it from the officer's perspective, the officer is wearing full uniform, running around, and it's hot. So they're turning up the air conditioning. And the people are sitting in a cell. You sit in a cold, you go to the movies, you sit in the movie theater, you're going to be cold, right? So there's some general misunderstanding, and the system is overwhelmed. They don't have enough officers to hold it back. And quite frankly, we're not really doing anything to fix the problem. So that's why we have the crisis we have. The other piece of it is you hear terms on TV. You hear migrant, asylum seeker, and refugee. Well, a refugee is somebody who is in a camp and then migrates to a country who will take the refugee, right? In North America, we have no refugee camps. So there's nowhere for people really to go and be processed before they come to the United States because there's no refugee camp. So that's why you hear the word migrant. Now, a lot of people use the word refugee on purpose to make a political point about the lack of kind of systems that we have for people. But it is a crisis. It really is a crisis. And quite frankly, I'm not real optimistic that our current body politic has the health in order to have a healthy conversation that's not driven by inflammatory resurrects.
Those blankets hold approximately 94% body heat. That's what Brian was saying,
yeah. So, it's not, you're cold. You're cold because you're sitting around all day.
Yeah.
So that's because I think originally when we heard that, our group felt like, oh, well, they must be doing that on purpose to try to discourage people from coming here. But I don't think it's quite that sinister.
How many
I think it's just
how many of them are proclaiming they're looking for God or for Jesus?
I don't know that.
I mean, they didn't say to you, please help me, Father, or please help me.
Well, most of the help that's coming for most of that money that's coming is coming from churches that are helping to set up those shelters that I was talking about. A lot of that is money from churches that are there. A lot of the church that hosted us. When they don't have groups like ours come, they are hosting refugees in the church. They're having refugees sleep in our church. I also just want to say this is my experience in El Paso. I feel like El Paso probably is a little bit more welcoming. So you hear some stories from other places, and I can't speak to that because I wasn't there. But this is just what I'm saying in El Paso. If you know anything about El Paso and Juarez, which is on the other side in Mexico, those have historically been like one city, growing up side by side. And in former days, in former times, people would flow in and out of the border very freely, coming back to visit and going there and working and coming back and going back and forth. You used to be able to cross that border. We didn't even need a passport. You could just walk across the bridge. And actually, when we went into Mexico, they didn't even ask for our passports going into Mexico. It was only coming back to the United States that we had to show our passports. And it took us 4 hours one night. We went for dinner in Mexico, and we were coming back to the United States. It took us 4 hours. The reason for that, according to the Border Patrol person who was checking our passports, was because they're so short of people in the processing centers that they're pulling people out from being at the border and checking people in. So they had 9 lanes and only 1 lane was open with 1 guard checking all these cars trying to get back into the United States. And to this day, I think there's a lot of people that live in Texas but work in Mexico. They come back and forth pretty freely. So, or a little less freely than they used to. So, yeah, it's a real mess, and our politicians are not doing us any good. And just to be fair, Trump didn't cause this problem, and the Democrats. You can say I don't like the way that Trump talks about this issue, but the Democrats don't have any solutions. I haven't heard any solutions from the 25 people running for president. They don't talk about this issue. The only one talking is Trump. So, and I think they need to start talking about this issue and start coming up with some solutions somehow. Don't just say, hey, I don't like what Trump's doing. What's your solution? How are you going to fix it? What's your policy that's going to fix it, right? So, and the other important thing that we met with a judge in New Mexico. We went to court one day and watched court proceedings, and the judge was nice enough to give us some time afterwards. And he said, there's 2 things. There's the criminal side, which is what he deals with. So Border Patrol is criminal, like they deal with the criminal side of it. And then there's the civil side. There's the politicians who make certain rules, and that's really ICE. ICE really, they are in the executive branch, so the president makes certain rules about certain things, and then ICE has to follow those things, and that's a separate piece. Like the judge was saying, he actually doesn't deport anybody. He just sentenced people to time in jail if they break the law, because his side is criminal, and the other side is civil, right? So I don't think we don't divide it up like that either, And the other thing I would say, we met with a person, the guy who runs all the shelters in El Paso from Annunciation House, and he was saying that we are really creating a health crisis amongst the Border Patrol because our government is making them do things that they feel are immoral, but they don't want to lose their job, so they do them anyway, and that is creating a moral crisis within them. And actually, the Border Patrol person we had talked about that a little bit, where he said, I didn't start this job to arrest kids. Like, that's not what I want to be doing. I want to be, I want to protect the border. I want to stop criminals from coming to the United States, but that's not why I'm here. I don't like doing that. I think we have to look at it from all angles, and maybe all of us are a little bit guilty of turning a blind eye and not caring all that much about the plight of other people in other countries and other places, and not caring what our government does and just trusting that they're going to do the right thing all the time, which is not always true.
Yep.
And so maybe all of us could be a little bit better informed. I know I could.
Boy, it's going too long ago. Because as you know, the Grange on the Heights, we had our awards night, and you couldn't be there. But the National Grange has come out with a First Responder Award. Now, in the past 2 years as we've done this, it's either been police or fire, or the normal ones. But this year I took a different approach because I figured that you, Father Ray, and Jason Wells have been the 3 most important people in my life, and I really appreciate all that you've done. So I want to present you with your First Responder Award.
Well, thank you. That is very... I wish I could have been. I was in El Paso, I believe.
I know. You were
on the night when this was going on, or else I would have been there, yeah, for sure. But thank you. I'm very honored, and I enjoy always our friendship, Dick, and I always enjoy you having me on the show and allowing me to talk about issues and religion and things that I think are important. So thank you for your service to our Concord area.
As I explained it that night, and Brian was there, I said, one of the first things when someone's in the hospital or in a situation where they need somebody besides the police and fire or a doctor, and I say, first, what do you hear them say? I need a priest. I need a minister. Please get me a clergy right away. And you're responding. You may not be there, but you've responded.
Mm.
And that gives the people, a patient or whatever, a lot of comfort to know that somebody is there.
Mm. Yeah.
You know, and for myself, yes, I'm not Lutheran, but still, I really appreciate all that you've done for me, and, you know, and I enjoy our talks, and I know this week is Ascension. I don't know if you do that or not in your church, but Thursday is Ascension.
Yeah, we
And
don't.
Pentecost.
Pentecost we certainly have. We don't have a special Ascension Day service, which I believe is Thursday.
Yeah, Thursday is Ascension.
But we usually celebrate it on the Sunday.
Yeah.
We just don't have a separate service on the
Yeah.
actual day. But we
Yeah.
usually have an Ascension Sunday. So
And I still don't understand that. That is the day that supposedly Jesus rose up to the heavens, right?
yep. He ascended into the Father. Yep.
I still imagine things that he's, you know, excuse me,
Yeah.
as he, after Easter, when he was supposedly risen from the dead, but yet he's walking with the disciples.
Mm-hmm.
How can, I don't know how that can be. Is that a ghost? Was that a ghost? Or was that a person? I mean, how could that be? Supposing he was dead.
Well, you know, I would say maybe different Christians think differently about this. I tend to take a very traditional view on resurrection, in that I believe it was a bodily resurrection. I believe the people who wrote the Gospels did backflips and handstands to make sure that we knew it was a bodily resurrection, that Jesus wasn't a ghost, that he ate, he walked, he talked, people touched him and felt him, and you know, those are not the attributes of I don't know much about ghosts, but
I know.
You don't really touch a ghost. So, and I think the importance of that moment for theologically is that Christians believe in the importance of the body, and that our bodies matter. And again, so Jesus' resurrection is a full resurrection, and you know, people will say, "Oh, that's unbelievable." Yes, it is. I think that's the point. Yes, it's unbelievable. Yes, you can't believe in it. Yes, and that's why we have faith. If it was a believable thing, we wouldn't need faith to believe in it, right?
To have him stand and put your hands in his holes in his body, it doesn't. I don't understand that, and maybe I should, but I just don't. I guess I look too much into it.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
You know.
Well, I would just say, for me, it's an important part of our faith is that Jesus rose from the dead.
Yeah.
He was it was a bodily thing. He came among us as a person, as a full being, and it wasn't some weird ghost thing, you know. So again, and I think that just goes to the point of like how important our bodies are, and how important that is for God to have us be part of that. So yeah, and I know other people will say, you know, there are other Christians who will say, "Oh, it's just a ghost," or some magical moment that the disciples had together when they remembered Jesus. And okay, but I don't think that that's the point of the story. See, sometimes we're trying to take the mystery out of it and explain it too much.
I know.
You know, and it's supposed to, and some of it, I think we leave it a mystery. It's God can do things that we don't think are possible. Right?
Oh yeah.
That's another part of the good part of having a bodily resurrection, is that God doesn't play by the same rules that you and I play by.
No.
You know, and God can do things beyond our understanding of what those things are. You know, and I've seen some of those things in my own life that I would argue are unexplainable mysteries of. You know, I believe it because it's my faith, not somebody else might look at the same thing that happened to me and go, "Oh, well, you know, that was just coincidental because of X, Y, and Z." But I look at those things and I think, that's God's work in my life. That's a miracle that God has put in front of me, you know. That's, I went to a funeral once. It was my aunt's sister-in-law who died, and she was really into butterflies, and it wasn't really butterfly time of year, and at the graveside, all of a sudden, all these blue-looking butterflies just started floating around.
Oh wow!
Now you can say, coincidental. I say, the work of God.
Yep.
that, you know, and the people who were there and we shared that moment together, we all agreed, you know, but that's why we have faith, right?
Sure.
That's a magical resurrection moment.
Yeah.
Someone else looks at that and just goes, you know, coincidence. But I think something had faith. I mean, I take those things on faith. So there you go.
Well, I appreciate you coming in today, Father.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for letting me talk about El Paso.
Oh, I wanted to hear all about it.
Yeah, I really am trying to, you know, talk to as many people about it and share my experience and hopefully.
Just glad you came back safe and sound.
Yeah, no problem. I was never in harm's way, so it was all good.
With that in mind, we want to thank. I got 2 minutes over. Okay, well.
Yeah.
Gosh, you know, and 2 more minutes there.
Well, I was never in harm's way. I'll tell you why. One, I was with a group of people, you know, like there was 13 other people with me always. That's the one. And then the people who led the border immersion brought us to places that were not going to put us in harm. For example, we went into Juarez, Mexico, and there's a lot out there about how Juarez is a very unsafe place, a lot of crime, etc., and that is all probably, there's truth in that. But the place in Juarez that we went was not one of those places. Was it poor? Extremely poor. It was a colonies, which is the people originally went there and squatted on the land, and then eventually bought the land, but they built kind of like makeshift houses on there, you know. And most people don't make very much money who live in that area, but that community that we went to has come together. There's 2 women that we met with in particular who were super workers, and they came together and they were like, we're gonna bound together as a community, and we're gonna make things better, and we're gonna create better life for our kids, and that's what they did, and it's a great example of how we can come together and work together.
There you go.
Yes.
With that in mind, have a great day. Thank you for joining us on Faith Speaks and Around Town, and thanks to Brian, my director, and we'll see you all soon on Dick Patton.